George sat in the corner of the classroom, his back pressed against the cold wall. His fingers gripped the edge of his school shirt tightly. Around him, classmates buzzed with noise, their voices blending into an unbearable hum. The boy was 8 years old, but he felt much smaller. The teacher was explaining something at the board. George couldn't hear a word. Only one question echoed in his head: how to survive until the end of the day. Every morning started the same way. Mum would wake him, stroke his head, say something encouraging. He'd nod, but inside everything clenched into a knot of fear. School felt like a massive maze where danger lurked at every turn. Too much noise in the cafeteria, too many people in the hallway, too many questions he couldn't answer. George didn't speak at school, not at all. Even when the teacher asked him directly, he'd just shake his head and stare at the floor. Home was slightly easier. There he could hide in his room, crawl under the covers, and imagine he was safe. But even there, anxiety wouldn't let go. What if tomorrow would be even worse? What if he could never be like other children? George's mother, Sarah, spent hours with him every evening. She tried to get her son to talk, but he'd just press against her and stay silent. She saw how he trembled when he heard unfamiliar sounds. She noticed how he flinched when someone came too close. Her heart was breaking. The school psychologist said a word Sarah would remember forever: anxiety disorder. George was afraid of the world, afraid of people, afraid of himself. It was hard for him to breathe around others, hard to make eye contact, hard to simply exist. One day, the school principal called Sarah in for a meeting. The woman spoke calmly, but worry colored her words. George wasn't coping. He was withdrawn. He didn't participate in class. Something needed to be done. That's when the principal told her about a program, the art room, a small space in the school where children could draw, sculpt, create. Specialists who understood children like George worked there. It was therapy through art. Maybe this could help. Sarah agreed. She had nothing to lose. The first time she brought George to this room, he refused to enter. He stood at the threshold staring at the bright paints, brushes, clay. Everything seemed foreign and frightening. But an adult woman with a kind smile knelt beside him and said quietly, "Here you can do whatever you want. No one will make you talk." George took one step inside, then another. He picked up a pencil, drew the first line on paper. It was just a line, but for him, it was an entire universe. Several months passed. George came to the art room twice a week. He drew, silently, intently. Sometimes his drawings were dark, full of sharp angles and chaos. Sometimes bright patches of color peeked through. The therapists didn't pressure him, didn't demand explanations. They were simply there. One day at the end of 2014, the school principal announced news. Their school would receive a special visitor, the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton. She was coming to officially open the renovated claw art room. She'd meet with the children, talk with them, see their work. Sarah heard about this and felt mixed emotions. On one hand, it was an honor. On the other, she was afraid. George already struggled with being around children. How would he react to the presence of an unfamiliar woman, especially royalty, with a crowd of people around her? But the therapist reassured her. Kate knew what kind of children the art room served. She'd chosen this organization as one of her patronages herself. She understood. She wouldn't pressure them. She simply wanted to see how art helped children find themselves. Sarah looked at her son. George stood by the window watching the falling snow. He didn't know about the upcoming visit. He didn't know his life was about to change. He just watched the snowflakes, and for the first time in a long while, a shadow of a smile crossed his face. In her office at Kensington Palace, Kate reviewed papers. Tomorrow's visit to Barlby Primary School. She prepared thoroughly, as always, read about the program, about the children, about how art therapy worked. This was her first official outing in the new year, and she wanted everything to go perfectly. But it wasn't just about protocol. Kate truly believed in the power of art. She'd studied art history at university herself. She knew how color, form, texture could express what couldn't be said in words. And she'd seen how this worked with children. The art room was one of the first patronages she'd taken after the wedding. A small organization, but doing enormous work. Children with trauma, with anxiety, with autism found a path to themselves through art. Kate wanted to help. Wanted more people to know about this program. Wanted more children to get a chance. She closed the folder and looked out the window. Snow was falling. Tomorrow she'd meet these children, see their work. Perhaps she could give hope to one of them. Perhaps someone would feel seen, understood. Kate picked up her phone and texted her assistant. Tomorrow I want to spend more time with the children than planned. Shorten the official part. It's important to me to talk with each of them. She pressed send and looked at the snow again. Somewhere out there, in West London, was a boy who didn't know that tomorrow his life would begin to change. And a woman who would become part of that change. January 15th, 2015. The morning began with bustle. At Barlby School, everything was ready for the visit. Corridors polished to a shine. In the art room, the children's best work was displayed. The principal nervously adjusted her glasses and checked every detail. George arrived at school and immediately felt something was off. Too many adults, too much movement. He froze at the classroom entrance, hesitant to enter. The therapist noticed him and approached. "Today is a special day," she said quietly. "A very kind woman is coming to visit. She wants to see your drawings. You can just be nearby. You don't have to talk. Just show her what you've created." George nodded. His heart beat fast, but he trusted this woman. She'd never lied to him. If she said everything would be okay, then it would be. Kate got in the car early that morning. She'd chosen a dark, grey Madison London dress for the visit. Formal but warm. Not too stuffy. She wanted the children to feel comfortable with her. As the car drove through London streets, Kate thought about the upcoming meeting. She imagined these children, how scared they were, how they tried to find their voice in a world that's often too loud and demanding. She remembered her own childhood fears. Of course, her childhood was privileged, but she remembered sometimes feeling lost, searching for her place. The car stopped at the school. Kate stepped out and was greeted by the principal. Brief hellos, handshakes, but Kate didn't want to linger on formalities. She asked, "Where are the children? I want to start with them." They led her to the art room. Kate paused at the threshold. The room was flooded with light. Children's work hung on the walls, bright, honest, sometimes chaotic, but always genuine. Several children sat at tables. They drew, sculpted, paying no attention to the adults. Kate slowly entered. She didn't want to startle this atmosphere of concentration and peace. She approached the first table. A girl was drawing a tree, enormous with thick branches. "This is beautiful," Kate said quietly. "Will you tell me about it?" The girl looked up, hesitated for a second, then smiled and began to talk. Kate listened, nodded, asked questions. Not as royalty, but as someone genuinely interested. She went around all the tables, talked with each child. Sometimes she sat down beside them, sometimes picked up a brush and made a few strokes alongside a child's work. The children gradually relaxed, laughed, showed their drawings. And then Kate noticed a boy in the corner. He sat apart from the others, bent over a sheet of paper. His hand moved quickly, confidently. But he didn't look up. didn't look at her. Kate felt something. Recognition. This child was different, more fragile, more closed off. She slowly approached him, sat in a chair nearby, not too close so as not to invade his space. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Kate. May I see what you're drawing?" George froze. His hand stopped in midair. He hadn't expected this woman to approach him. He heard her voice, soft, calm, not demanding an answer. Slowly he turned his head, looked at her. Kate had kind eyes. She smiled, but not widely, not frighteningly, just warmly. George sensed she wouldn't force him to speak. He slid the drawing closer to her. On the page was a bird. Not bright, not detailed, but recognizable. A bird trying to take flight, but its wings weren't fully spread yet. Kate looked at the drawing for a long time. She understood. This boy was drawing himself. She saw it in every line, in every shadow. "This is very beautiful," she said, and there was no falseness in her voice. "You know what I like most? This bird doesn't give up. See how it's trying? It will definitely fly." George looked at his drawing, then at Kate again. Something inside him stirred. This woman saw what he was trying to say. She understood. Kate didn't leave right away. She stayed sitting next to George, took a sheet of paper and a pencil, began to draw, silently. Beside him, didn't say anything, didn't ask questions, simply was there. George watched her hands. They moved confidently but gently. She drew the sky. Clouds, mountain outlines, simple shapes, but they held a kind of freedom. "You know," Kate said quietly, not looking up from her drawing, "when I was sad or scared, I always drew. It helped. I could say on paper what I couldn't say in words." George listened. His breathing became calmer. Next to this woman, he felt safe. She didn't demand anything from him. She simply shared. The therapist standing nearby watched the scene with tears in her eyes. She'd worked with George for months. She knew how difficult it was for him to be around people. And here he sat next to an unfamiliar woman. Not running, not hiding, listening. Kate finished her drawing, looked at it, then at George. "Would you like to keep it?" she asked. George nodded. The first time during the meeting, he nodded. Not words, but a response. Kate smiled, placed the drawing in front of him. "Then it's yours. And you know what? I'd like to see how your bird learns to fly. Maybe someday you'll show me." George looked at her. His lips trembled. He wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. But Kate understood. She saw it in his eyes. He wanted to. He'd try. She stood up, placed her hand on the edge of the table. "Keep drawing," she said. "You're doing wonderfully." And walked on, but looked back once more. George watched her go, and for the first time in a long while, his face didn't show anxiety. It showed something else. Hope. That evening, when Kate returned home, she thought about the boy for a long time, about his drawing, about his eyes. She knew she couldn't help every child personally, but if even one of them felt seen, understood, then this day wasn't in vain. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Monitor the art room program. Find out if we can expand. More children should have this opportunity." Several weeks passed after Kate's visit. George continued attending the art room, but something had changed. The therapists noticed immediately. He became braver. Not in words, he still stayed silent, but in actions. He started trying new materials: clay, watercolor, pastels. Before, he was afraid to make mistakes, afraid to ruin things. Now he experimented. His drawings became brighter. Colors appeared in them. Sarah saw this at home. George began drawing in the evenings. He'd spread large sheets of paper on the floor and work for hours. She didn't interfere, just watched. Her son was finding his language. One evening, George brought her a drawing. On it was a woman. Sarah recognized her immediately. Kate. George had drawn her as he remembered, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Is this her?" Sarah asked quietly. George nodded. "Was she kind to you?" Another nod. Then George did something incredible. He took his mother's hand and pressed it to his chest. Sarah felt his heartbeat. Calm, steady. Not like before when he was panicking. "Do you feel better?" she asked. George looked at her, and for the first time in months, he opened his mouth. His voice was quiet, hoarse from long silence. But it was a voice. Yes, one word. But for Sarah, it was an entire universe. She hugged her son and couldn't stop the tears. Her boy was beginning to return. Changes were happening at school too. The teacher noticed that George started participating in lessons. He didn't speak, but nodded when she asked questions, raised his hand when needed at the board, wrote answers when he couldn't speak. He was trying. The principal called Sarah in for a meeting, told her about the progress, said George could continue sessions in the art room for as long as needed. The program was working. He was opening up. But Sarah knew it wasn't just about therapy. It was about that woman who saw her son, who took the time, who showed him there was a place for him in this world. Kate, meanwhile, continued her work. She visited other schools with the art room program, met with children, listened to their stories. Each visit strengthened her conviction. This works. Art saves. But the boy from Balby School wouldn't leave her mind. She asked her assistant to contact the principal, find out how the children she'd met were doing, without naming names, without violating confidentiality. Just find out if something had helped. The principal responded with a letter. She couldn't name specific names, but wrote, "One of the boys you spoke with has started talking. For the first time in months, his mother cried with happiness. We're grateful to you for the time you gave each child." Kate read this letter again and again. She sat in her office, tears glistening in her eyes. It was worth it. Every minute, every effort was worth it. She called William. Told him about the letter. "You're doing important work," he said. "These children won't forget you." Kate knew he was right, but it wasn't about being remembered. It was about these children remembering. They matter. Their feelings matter. Their voice counts. Spring turned to summer. George continued attending the art room. His progress was slow but steady. He started talking to the therapist. In short phrases, but they were words. He talked about his drawings, about what they meant to him. One day the therapist asked him, "What changed? What helped you start speaking?" George thought for a long time, then said, "She saw my bird and said it would fly." The therapist didn't immediately understand who he was talking about. Then she remembered. The visit. Kate. That conversation. "And you believed her?" George nodded. "She didn't lie. I felt it." The therapist wrote this in her report. Not for the public, not for statistics, for herself. To remember, sometimes one meeting, one word, one gesture can change everything. Kate was preparing for a new project. The Royal Foundation was planning to expand the Child Mental Health Support Program. The art room was part of this initiative. They needed more funding, more specialists, more schools. She conducted meetings, wrote letters, spoke at forums, talked about what she'd seen with her own eyes, about children who couldn't find words but found colors, about children who stayed silent but screamed on paper, about children who deserved a chance. Her work brought results. New schools joined the program. New art rooms opened. More children received help. But sometimes, late in the evening, when work was finished, Kate thought about specific faces, about the girl who drew the tree, about the boy with the bird, about all those children she'd met. She didn't know all their stories, didn't know how their lives unfolded later, but she believed. Believed she'd given them something important. Faith in themselves. Hope. 2 years passed. George was different now. Not completely different. Anxiety hadn't disappeared. But he'd learned to live with it. Learned to breathe when he was scared. Learned to speak when needed. He still visited the art room. It became his refuge, a place where he could be himself. His work now hung on the walls. Bright, complex, beautiful. The therapists were proud of him. At school, he found a friend. One, but real. A boy who was also quiet. They sat together during breaks and drew. Didn't talk much, but understood each other. The teacher once told Sarah, "Your son has changed. He's still quiet, but he's no longer hiding. He's here. He's with us." Sarah cried. Again. But these were different tears. Tears of relief and gratitude. In the spring of 2017, the school announced a competition. Children could submit their best work. Winners would receive a special certificate and the opportunity to display their work at a school exhibition. By that time, the art room program had already merged with Place 2B. The organization had grown. Thousands of children across the country received help. Kate continued working with them, visited schools, met with children. Each meeting reminded her of George. She thought about him often, asked about his progress through school principals, never violated his confidentiality, never requested personal meetings. She understood. He needed to live his own life. But she held him in her heart. George, meanwhile, continued his journey. At 14, he spoke in front of the class for the first time, a presentation on art. He talked about therapy through creativity, about how drawing saved his life. His voice trembled, his hands sweated, but he spoke. The class listened in silence. When he finished, everyone applauded, not out of politeness. From the heart, after class, a girl approached him. She was new, quiet, scared. "Thank you," she said. "I thought I was the only one like this. That only I couldn't talk to people." George looked at her. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror 5 years ago. "You're not alone," he said. "And you know what? There's a place where it'll be easier for you. Come on, I'll show you." He brought her to the art therapy room, introduced her to the therapist, gave her paper and pencils. "Just try," he said. "Draw what you feel. You don't have to talk." The girl took a pencil. George sat nearby, silently, like Kate once sat next to him. In that moment, he understood. The circle was complete. Someone helped him. Now he could help others. He could be that big bird teaching the small one to fly. Sarah watched her son and didn't recognize him. This confident, speaking, helping others teenager was her boy, the same one who couldn't leave the house without panicking. One evening she asked him, "What changed? When did you realize you could do all this?" George thought for a long time, then answered, "When she said my bird would fly." I didn't believe it at first, but she spoke so confidently, like she knew, and I thought, maybe she's right, maybe I can. "And you could," Sarah said quietly. "I could," George agreed, "but not right away, and not alone. People helped me. You, the therapists, her. You all believed when I couldn't believe myself." Sarah hugged him. Her son had grown, not just physically. He'd grown inside, found himself, found his path. Kate continued her work. In 2019, she launched a new initiative, the Royal Foundation Centre for Early Childhood, focus on early years of children's lives, on what shapes us at the very beginning. She often spoke at forums and conferences, talked about the importance of supporting children with mental difficulties, about how early intervention saves lives, and though she never named names, she always thought about specific faces, about George, about the girl with the tree, about all those children she'd met. Her work grew. More programs, more schools. More children received help. And with each new project, she thought, here's another George. Here's another bird that will learn to fly. In 2021, George finished middle school. He was 16. He was applying to art college, wanted to study art therapy, wanted to become someone who helps other children find their voice through creativity. In his application essay, he wrote his story. Honestly, without embellishment, about a boy who couldn't speak, about a woman who saw him, about a bird that learned to fly, he was accepted. Moreover, they offered him a scholarship. The committee wrote, "Your story inspires. We believe you'll become an excellent therapist." George read this letter and cried. Happy tears, tears of gratitude. He'd done it. He'd truly flown. On his first day at college, he drew a new bird. Large, strong, with widespread wings. This bird wasn't just flying, it was soaring. He hung the drawing in his dorm room. Every morning, waking up, he looked at it and remembered the words, "This bird will definitely fly." It flew, and now was helping others fly. Kate never met George again, but she knew about his journey, through school principals, through reports, through those invisible threads connecting people who changed each other's lives. She kept his drawing. 2 birds, big and small. This drawing reminded her why she does what she does. Not for fame, not for recognition. For one boy who believed. For thousands of children who will believe. Sometimes, late in the evening, she looked at this drawing and thought, maybe we're all birds. Some are already flying, some are just learning, and some sit on the edge, afraid to spread their wings. Our job is to be there, to be those who say, you can, you'll manage, your wings are stronger than you think. George understood this. He became that bird teaching others to fly. And somewhere in the world was another small bird looking at him and thinking, maybe I can too, a circle of kindness, started by one woman, taken up by one boy, passed on, endless, beautiful. This is the real miracle. Not in grand gestures, not in loud words, but in quiet moments, in one drawing, in one promise, in one belief. Belief that every child deserves a chance, every bird deserves the sky, and sometimes all it takes is one person who says, I see you, I believe in you, you will fly. The hero's name George Miller has been changed to protect confidentiality. The story is based on real events within the Art Room program, which Kate Middleton supported as patron from January 2012 until the organization merged with Place 2B in January 2018. All key events, the Duchess's visits to schools, the art therapy program for children with emotional difficulties, the official opening of the Claw Art Room at Barby Primary School in January 2015 are documented. George hesitated. He'd never shown his drawings publicly, only in the art room, only to therapists and his mother. But the therapist convinced him. Your bird deserves to be seen. George submitted a drawing. That one. The bird he'd drawn 2 years ago. He'd worked on it more. Now the wings were spread. The bird was taking flight. Under the drawing, he wrote one word. Hope. When the judges announced the results, George's name was called first. He'd won. His mother sat in the audience and couldn't believe it. Her son walked onto the stage, alone, without her help, took the certificate, looked at the audience, and smiled. It was a small smile, uncertain, but it was a smile. The first public smile in all those years. After the ceremony, the principal approached them. Sarah, I'd like to send a photo of George's work to the Royal Foundation office. They're collecting success stories from children in the art room program. Not for publication, just for a report. They'll show it to the Duchess, how her work helps children. Sarah looked at George. What do you think? George thought, then nodded. Let her see it. She promised. She wanted to know if my bird would fly. They sent the photo. Kate received it along with dozens of other stories. She was reviewing reports, reading letters, and suddenly stopped at one photo. A bird, with spread wings, the word hope below. Kate looked at this drawing for a long time. Something about it was familiar. Then she remembered. The boy, Barlby School, 2 years ago. The quiet boy who drew a bird with unspread wings. This was the same bird, only now it was flying. Kate closed her eyes. She felt a wave of emotion rising inside her. Joy, pride, gratitude. This child hadn't given up. He'd continued. And his bird flew. She immediately picked up her phone, called her assistant. Find the contact information for Barlby School. I want to send a letter to this boy, personally, from me. The assistant was surprised, but didn't ask questions. Within an hour, Kate had all the information. She sat at her desk and picked up a pen. An email would be easier, but she wanted this to be special. Personal. She began to write. Dear George, I saw your bird. It flew. I always knew it would. Remember when we drew together 2 years ago? I remember that day very well. I remember your drawing and your eyes. There was so much in them that you couldn't say in words. Now I'm looking at your new work, and I see you found your voice. Not just in words, but in colors, in lines, in images. This is incredibly brave. I'm proud of you. Keep drawing. Keep flying. With warmth and faith in you, Kate. She sealed the envelope, asked to have it delivered personally. Not through the mail, but through her assistant. She wanted to be sure George received it. A week later, the envelope arrived at Barlby School. The principal called George and his mother in, held out the envelope. This is for you. From the Duchess. George looked at the envelope. His hands trembled. Sarah helped him open it. They read the letter together. With each word, George's eyes filled with tears. She remembered. She remembered his bird. She remembered the promise. George pressed the letter to his chest. Sarah hugged him. They both cried. The principal couldn't hold back either. Do you want to reply to her? Sarah asked quietly. George nodded. He took a sheet of paper. Didn't write words. Instead, he drew. 2 birds. One big, one small. They flew together. Under the drawing, he wrote, "Thank you for helping me fly." They sent the drawing back. Kate received it the same day she was preparing for another official event. Stylists worked on her hair, makeup artists prepared cosmetics. Everything was as usual. The assistant brought in an envelope. This is from that boy, from Barlby School. Kate asked everyone to leave. Remained alone. Opened the envelope. Saw the drawing. 2 birds, big and small. She understood. The big bird was her. The small one, George. He was drawing how she'd helped him, how they flew together. Kate sat in a chair. Her hands trembled. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smudging the unfinished makeup. But she didn't care. In this moment, she wasn't a duchess. She was simply a woman who saw how her action changed someone's life. She looked at the drawing and thought, this is why. Not for newspaper photos, not for protocol, for moments like these, for children like these, so that at least one child would feel they're not alone. The stylists returned half an hour later, saw Kate's tear-stained face and were alarmed. Is everything okay? One of them asked. Kate smiled. Through tears, but smiled. Yes, everything's wonderful. I just received the best gift of my life. She carefully placed the drawing in a folder. She'd keep this drawing forever. It reminded her why she does what she does. That evening, Kate called William, told him the whole story, from the first meeting to today. "You see," she said, "I meet hundreds of children, but this boy, he showed me that even the smallest action can change everything. I just sat next to him, just said a few words, and that was enough." "Because you did it from the heart," William replied. "Children feel it. They know when someone truly sees them." Kate hung up and looked at the drawing again. 2 birds, flying together. She thought, maybe we all need someone to help us take flight. Who sees our wings when we don't see them ourselves? Who says, "You can do this"? For George, that woman was her, but for her, such people were many. Her family, her friends, and these children who taught her to be stronger, kinder, more real. She took the drawing and hung it on the wall in her office. Not in the living room, not in an official room. In her personal space, where she worked on projects, planned visits, thought about the future. Every time things were difficult, when she doubted whether to continue, she looked at those 2 birds. And remembered, it's worth it. At Balby School, George's drawing was hung in the main hallway. Underneath, a plaque read, "George Miller, winner of the school art competition." Work titled Hope. Every day, hundreds of children passed by this drawing. Someone would stop. Look, think about their own wings, about their own dreams. And George kept drawing. Every day, every week. It became his way of communicating with the world, his language, his voice. The anxiety didn't completely disappear. Sometimes it returned. But now George knew what to do. He'd take paints, take paper, and draw birds, draw the sky, draw freedom. And every time he was especially scared, he remembered the woman with kind eyes, who said, "This bird will definitely fly." He believed her then. He believes her now. 3 years passed. George became a teenager. He was 12 years old. Anxiety was still part of his life, but it no longer controlled him. He'd learned to live with it. Learned to recognize its approach and cope. He transferred to middle school. New place, new people. It was scary, but not like before. Now he had tools, the art room, drawing, and the memory that someone believed in him. The new school also had an art therapy program, smaller than the elementary schools, but it existed. George went there his first week. The therapist greeted him with a smile. "Tell me about yourself," she asked. George pulled a folder from his backpack. Inside were his drawings, years of work, hundreds of sheets. He showed her the bird. "That one. The first. This is me," he said. "When I was 8, I couldn't talk, couldn't be with people, but I could draw." The therapist looked at the work. She saw the journey. From dark, chaotic drawings to bright ones full of life. She saw a story of healing. "And now?" she asked. "Who are you now?" George pulled out his latest drawing. He'd made it last night. A boy stood at the edge of a cliff. Before him stretched an enormous sky. He was ready to jump, ready to fly. "I'm still learning," George said, "but I'm no longer afraid to try." The therapist smiled. "Then welcome. Here you can be yourself." George nodded. He knew this. He'd always known there were places where he could be himself. At school, he didn't become popular. He was still quiet. But he made a few friends. Just as quiet. Just as creative. They gathered in the library during breaks and drew together. One day, the art teacher suggested they create a project, an exhibition for younger classes. Theme: What gives you hope? George agreed. He knew what he'd draw. He worked on this drawing for a week. large canvas, acrylic, bright colors. The drawing showed a woman. She sat next to a boy. They drew together. Between them were no words, but there was a connection. The boy looked at the woman, and in his eyes was hope. Under the drawing, George wrote, "Sometimes one person can change everything. Thank you for seeing me." They opened the exhibition in April 2018. Parents, teachers, younger students came. Work hung in the hallway. Bright, honest, touching. George's work hung in the center, the biggest, most noticeable. People stopped in front of it, read the caption, asked, "Who is this woman?" George stood nearby. He no longer hid. He explained, "This is the Duchess of Cambridge. She met with me when I was 8. I couldn't speak then, but she saw me. She said I'd manage, and I believed her. People listened. Some cried. Some hugged him." The art teacher stood to the side thinking, "This is it. This is why we teach children art. Not for grades, not for diplomas, for healing." Photos from the exhibition appeared in the local newspaper. A small article, nothing special, but someone from the Royal Foundation saw it. Sent the article to Kate. She read and couldn't stop. This boy had grown up. He hadn't just survived. He'd flourished. And he remembered that meeting. Remembered the words. Kate thought, maybe we underestimate the power of simple actions. We think we need to do something grand to change the world. But sometimes it's enough to just sit nearby. Just say, "I see you, I believe in you."